Drivers from the east who feel discriminated, drivers from the west who feel threatened. We hit the road to find out what exactly is going on.
Now authorities in Greene County discovered the body of yet another red-headed victim. The string of homicides have become known as the redhead murders. All were discovered along major interstates.
There were some cases in Tennessee, but also in Kentucky.
Who drove trucks for a living.
The ongoing supply chain issues disrupting so many shopping plans ahead of the busy holiday season. One critical link in that chain is getting a lot of attention: truck drivers. Well, a new article on NBCnews.com examines the role truckers are playing in the supply bottlenecks we're seeing at so many of our major ports.
Social dumping, or the use of weaker labor and social standards to be more competitive, has become widespread in European road transport, and truck drivers are the ones bearing the consequences.
Hey guys, welcome back to my channel here. It's Comrade Lavender here, and I'm back with another activism deep dive video, political topic video. So let's get started into this video. But before that, I'm going to put on the screen videos that are related to this if you want to check them out that are on my channel. So let's get started into this new activism video. So yeah. Diesel pollution is known to be hazardous to human health. Groups at particular risk include workers in the trucking industry, the communities located near major sources of diesel pollution, such as people who live near railroads and railways, ship ports and freeways, for example. Truck drivers who serve ports are at especially high risk. They may be exposed to pollution from their own diesel trucks, and they drive in locations where there are many other sources of pollution in general, including diesel pollution, including other port trucks, cargo handling equipment, ships and locomotives and vehicles, and are likely to inhale soot from the air around them. Measuring truck drivers' exposure levels to diesel, soot, or black carbon inside trucks serving the ports. To do so, they mentioned the air inside the cabs of the trucks, ranging in age from 1981 trucks to 2006 model years for an entire work shift serving the Port of Oakland. What they found was disturbing. All of the average black carbon levels measured within the truck cabs were at least 10 times higher than the background level of 0.3 M3 found in residential area of Oakland, California. Samples from inside the 1981 truck show levels of black carbon roughly 25 times higher than in the background. These levels are significantly higher than what was previously found along truck corridors near the Port of Oakland and the Port of Oakland's terminal, suggesting that the diesel exhaust may be accumulating inside the truck cabs. Thus, port truck drivers face even greater health risks than do the residents of the surrounding communities. The amount of black carbon we measured inside the truck cabs was high enough to increase health risks by up to 2,600 excess cancers per million. Drivers double the level considered acceptable by the Occupational Safety Health Administration, the OSHA, and roughly 2,000 times greater than the level typically considered acceptable by state and federal environmental protection agencies. The non-cancer health risks, such as premature death, are likely to be even higher and greater. Newer trucks tend to be slightly cleaner than the older model trucks, implying that some portion of the diesel, buildup that drivers inhale comes from their own trucks. However, the DPM levels found inside the cabs of newer, cleaner trucks remained elevated across model years, showing greater variation depending on the location. This led us to conclude that the most of the exposure was from surrounding diesel sources in the port environment. Diesel exhaust is a well-known human carcinogen, estimated to be responsible for 70% of the total cancer risk from air pollution. Most notably, the occupational exposure for truck drivers and other workers is associated with lung cancer risk 40% higher on average. In fact, a recent study of U.S. trucking industry found an excess risk of death due to lung cancer and heart disease, particularly among truck drivers. The negative health impacts of diesel pollution affect workers too. Port workers ranging from longshoremen to truck drivers are exposed to high levels of diesel pollution on the job, and truck drivers are especially vulnerable. The vast majority of drivers work as independent contractors and must arrange for their own health insurance, but most are too poorly paid to afford it. In recent studies, 90% of the drivers serving at the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach reported to have no health coverage or health insurance. As independent contractors, port drivers do not receive paid sick days, nor are they covered by workers' compensation insurance. Tim Clemens, a victim of capitalism, has driven nearly 3 million miles around the U.S. in his 30 years as a truck driver. This used to be a great job, he said. I provide a valuable service to my country. It would be nice if we weren't looked down upon like trash. While the industry says there is a national shortage of drivers and complaints regulations is holding back hiring, Tim has another theory about why this is. Working conditions have deteriorated since he started driving, he said. It's more difficult to find parking and access to bathrooms. Dispatchers and brokers are pushing harder to deliver loads in a certain amount of time, or else drivers face fines or deductions from their pay. Drivers earn less. All these factors may explain why the annual turnover rate at big trucking companies and employers averaged 94% between 1995 and 2017, and that's before COVID upended the supply chain and increased demand for drivers and the pressures they faced. If you haven't found a place to park by 2 or 3 p.m. in a truck stop, you're looking for any place to park, yet we're fined and towed just for trying to be safe. As nasty as it might sound, most of us experienced drivers carry around garbage bags and a 5-gallon bucket or a potty chair with plastic grocery bags. According to the American Trucking Associations, the lobbying organization for large trucking employers, the U.S. has a shortage of 80,000 truck drivers that is disrupting the national supply chain, and the shortages are projected to get worse over the next few years. Nearly 2 million Americans work as truck drivers, a rate that has steadily increased over the time and over the years from about 1.57 million truck drivers in 2000. States issue more than 450 commercial driver's licenses per year. Retail giants enable trucker exploitation. Powerhouses such as Target, Costco benefit while drivers plunge into debt. America's retail giants have spent a decade ignoring signs of labor abuse in the supply chains, fighting government efforts to crack down even as thousands of truckers were driven to debt poverty. Retailers and manufacturers rarely hire the truckers directly. Instead, they rely on a maze of subcontractors to move their goods. Target, Costco, Howlett Packard, and many others have benefited from California port trucking companies that forced their drivers into debt, made them work up to 20 hours a day, and sometimes paid them pennies per hour. They fought bills that would have converted port truckers to fully protected employees and others that would give state agencies more leeway to punish trucking companies with violations. Truckers win $30 million in wage theft settlements. Hundreds of drivers said they earned less than minimum wage when delivering to retailers. From ports of LA and Long Beach, one of the world's largest trucking companies, XPO Logistics, has agreed to pay $30 million to settle lawsuits filed by hundreds of drivers. They pay drivers less than legal wages, failed to pay them for missed meal and rest periods, and failed to reimburse them for business expenses or for waiting time penalties. Trucking companies classify many of their drivers as independent contractors, meaning they are ineligible for a host of labor protections. In recent times, California's labor commissioner has awarded more than $50 million to some 500 truckers who claimed they were deprived of wages through misclassification as contractors rather than employees. The grim reality of the European road transport sector. Mass exploitation and inhumane working conditions are rife within the European road transport sector. Companies eager to make a profit at any cost take advantage of the high demand for road transportation. They charge multinationals a decent price for operating their supply chains, but the money paid for the service is not fairly distributed to its drivers carrying out the actual work. Instead, the transport operators use loopholes to underpay their workers, taking drivers from Eastern Europe on Eastern European contractors and using them to drive exclusively in Western Europe. This business model means they're able to pay low wages and social security contributions while taking advantage of the right for EU members to work all over Europe. Interviews with drivers have uncovered that exploitative practices are commonplace in the trucking industry, and additional abuses that drivers faced as a result of the COVID-19 crisis, including drivers being forced to sign contracts in languages they cannot read or understand, drivers being supplied with false documentation about their employment status, drivers being threatened with violence and financial penalties for alerting authorities about driving and resting times, safety, pay, and other issues, drivers provided with little or no personal protective equipment during the COVID-19 pandemic. Exemptions to driving and rest time regulations have led to employers coercing drivers to work more dangerous hours, drivers being forced to stay in their vehicles with access to clean water, facilitating toilets or sanitation facilities. Drivers are not receiving sick pay. Outside a large logistics warehouse in Germany, it was witnessed that drivers washing and cooking in the snow. The journalist went on to ask the drivers why they did not use the facilities inside the warehouse. They were told the company did not give them access. One driver explained the only place to go to the toilet was a small shop, 10 minutes walk, but the shop was already closed at 20 till. The driver parked in the spot all weekend waiting to unload. PBS Frontline and ProPublica investigate deadly truck accidents in the documentary America's Dangerous Trucks and the fight over the measures that could save thousands of lives. As death rise, the documentary examines decades of legal maneuvering, political influence, lax regulation, and industry opposition, reveals how regulators and lobbyists block measures to prevent deadly crashes. Thousands of people all over the world have been killed when their cars slide underneath the trailer of large trucks. For decades, the Department of Transportation and the trucking industry have rejected safety devices meant to prevent these underride crashes. An average of about 5,000 people a year are killed in crashes involving a semi-truck, a death toll that has soared by almost 50% since 2011, according to the most recent federal data. The news organization revealed explosive emails detailing how the trucking industry officials pressured Department of Transportation regulators to alter a report that recommended a nationwide mandate for guards specifically designed to protect pedestrians, bicyclists, and motorists. The guards are already used around the world and in several cities. It's a good documentary. I've actually watched it. Go check it out. Here are some true crime cases. There is an epidemic of sexual abuse and sexism and sexual harassment that spreads unchecked throughout the entire trucking industry. In October 2020, Laura would be picking up a load in Fresno, California that morning and dropping it off in Florida that evening. She had never driven with the male colleague assigned to co-drive with her before, but said yes because she recently graduated from training and needed experience as well as the money. She drove first so another driver could rest in one of the two beds in the back of the cab, but once they were on the road, he kept coming to the front in his underwear. He asked her if she liked sex and then told her he wanted to pay her for sex. When she told him she wasn't a sex worker, he claimed he was joking and returned to the back. When she eventually pulled over to take a nap, her co-driver attacked her, describing how she fought him as he pulled her pants down. He was naked, his hands were all over me and everywhere. I remember saying no. She called her dispatcher in tears, only to be told that she shouldn't call the police, to just keep driving. So she did, but when her co-driver kept coming to the front and patting her on the head, she pulled over and called 911. I just wanted to go home, she said. Female truckers only make up 7% of the workforce in the trucking industry. In a recent study, more than 90% reported experiencing at least one incident of sexual harassment in their careers. After the incident, Eagle stopped calling her to work. The company didn't pay her for the drive to Arizona. Her assailant, meanwhile, kept driving for Eagle for months afterward. Her story is recounted in a lawsuit that she's filed, naming the company and the other trucker, alleging sexual and racial harassment and discrimination, as well as sexual battery, wrongful termination, and a failure to pay her what she was owed. Eagle Truck Lines has denied the allegations in the lawsuit. The way the company treated me, I felt worthless, she said. Human trafficking in the trucking industry. Every day all across the world, children are being sold as prostitutes to fulfill the demands of an eager capitalism market driven primarily by men of all ages and professionals. The trucking industry is no exception. Oftentimes, traffickers are transporting prostituted children, making it harder for them to seek help or escape. Truck stops are not only convenient stops, but they also provide a place slightly secluded from public view. Truck stops are opportunities to pick up, drop off, or stop for paid sex with prostitute girls. Those girls are known as lot lizards in the trucking community. Runaway and homeless youth are at extreme risk for commercial sexual exploitation and human trafficking at truck stops. 49 years ago, a sniper blew up a semi-truck hauling 20 tons of dynamite, killing the driver. The incident occurred on September 30th, 1970 on I-40 near Springfield, Missouri. According to the reporting from the New York Times, 2 weeks prior to the incident, Teamsters Local 823 had gone on strike against Joplin, Missouri-based trucking company Tri-State Motors, Inc. Tri-State Motors continued to operate in spite of the strike that was going on. On September 30th, 48-year-old truck driver John Galt was operating a truck leased to Tri-State Motors, hauling a load of more than 20 tons of dynamite along I-40 en route to a mining area in southeastern Missouri. Shots were fired at Galt's truck, triggering a massive explosion that shattered windows 12 miles away in Springfield, Missouri. A crater that was 50 feet wide and 30 feet deep was left on I-40. Fragments of the truck were found for a quarter of a mile from the explosion site. Galt died instantly from the explosion. A witness later reported seeing shots fired from the car and gave police the license plate number. 2 Tri-State Company driver Teamster members, Bobby Lee Shirkler and Gerald Lee Bowden, both 29 at the time, were charged with second-degree murder. Bowden's wife, Sharon Lynn Bowden, was also charged with second-degree murder, although it isn't clear whether she was ever convicted of the crime or not. According to his 1972 appeal, Scholler testified that he did not mean to do any bodily harm to anyone, and he never considered the possibility that it might be carrying explosive dynamite, and he was just wanting to disable the truck. Prosecutors argued that he had been working, with this company, and he should have known that half the materials transported by the Tri-State Motors were explosive. He was later sentenced to 99 years in prison and paroled after only 8 years in prison. The other person, Gerald Bowen, was also convicted on second-degree murder charges and sentenced to 10 years in prison. He was paroled in 1975. Does the trucking industry have a serial killer problem? Truck driving serial killers and the deadly freeways they hunt. It is really the recipe for the perfect crime. Thousands of miles of open road, truckers who are never in one place for very long, and victims law enforcement views as disposable, such as prostitutes or runaways. It's why such big rig murderers have been able to hide and drive in plain sight for decades. At the Flying J truck stop on I-40 in West Memphis, Arkansas, and rumor was spreading among the long-haul truck drivers between grabbing meals and fueling up their big rigs. They spoke about a serial killer said to be among them. It was 2003, and the bodies of missing and murdered women were being found beneath bridges and overpasses, inside cheap motels, and along highway off-ramps. For decades, no one had noticed the pattern of murdered, missing women being dumped along the highway. It is until Terry Turner, a criminal analysis Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation, began spotting similarities. Years later, a second woman, author and journalist Ginger Strand, took a bird's-eye view of America's highways and freeways, providing the missing context for how the country's roads have become the workplace of serial killer truck drivers and why law enforcement, especially the FBI, had missed it for decades. In one case, for instance, the victim, Vanilla, was a 47-year-old sex worker known for her honeyed voice from her advertisements that went around all over the CB radio. Born in Margaret Holmes Gardner, she was a West Memphis local. In 2003, a UPS letter carrier happened to stumble upon Vanilla's body in Shearsville, Arkansas, left underneath a interstate freeway on-ramp. The remains of 43-year-old Stranda Beard, also a sex worker, who frequented truck stops, were uncovered alongside I-40 on the eastern end of Oklahoma. Each of the women's bodies had shown evidence that their limbs had been bound before they were killed. Over the next 4 months, 4 more women, Vicki Anderson, 45, Sandra Richardson, 39, Patsy Leonard, 23, and Casey Jo Pipestem, were dead. The growing number of victims, who were often white or indigenous sex workers, alarmed Turner. These women were somebody's mom, someone's sister, or someone's daughter, and regardless of the situation they may have found themselves in, no one deserved to be treated that way at all, she told local media. Turner and her network of law enforcement agencies eventually identified a suspect, a trucker named John Robert Williams. After his arrest for murder in a separate case, Williams confessed to killing a total of 12 women, including those Turner was investigating. A few years later, she had published a book, Killer on the Road, Violence and the American Interstate, that would place Turner's work in its proper context, demonstrating how truck drivers became some of the country's most prolific serial killers and how highways and freeways hollowed out a space for murderers to roam. Long-haul trucker is an ideal occupation for a serial killer, and they're on the move again, which gives them the opportunity to dispose of a body. Strand is also interested in determining whether something about the trucking industry itself that could be partially to blame. You're on the road for long, lonely hours, being paid a horribly low wage, by the mile usually, subjected to difficult deadlines and corporate surveillance. And then the conditions in which you live are awful. There's no good sleep, no good food, and you're sitting in a cab all day, sleeping in and out at night. You yourself are always a target for violence and robbery. Despite the creation of the FBI's Highway Serial Killer Initiative, Strand believes there's much more to be done to protect sex workers who are so often the victims of truck-driving serial killers. Until it happens, men like Delmas Colvin, aka the Interstate Strangler, a former long-haul trucker who's claimed to have killed somewhere between 47 and 52 women, will continue to roam the open road with near impunity.